next panel, we will have our panel discussion on the importance of women, peace, and security, and why the integration of women is so pivotal in national security. It'll be moderated by Dr. Joan Johnson Freese, and as soon as she get mic'd up, they'll be in here. So while they're doing that, feel free if you need to step out, grab some water, some coffee, but we're gonna go right into the panel as soon as they get mic'd up. Thanks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we're going to go right into the panel, so go ahead and silence your cell phones. So our next panelist, again, our next panel will be on the discussion of the importance of women, peace, and security, and why the integration of women is so pivotal in national security. And it'll be moderated by Dr. Joan Johnson Freese.
Yes, I don't need to introduce myself again, but I would like to begin by asking each of our panelists to say a little bit about themselves. Eileen, if you want to start.
Thank you, Joan. We've known each other many years. This is my former professor. She was 2.
I was very young.
I am a former war zone correspondent for ABC and CNN. Most of my 16 years overseas I spent actually based in Moscow. So I've covered many, many wars, Northern Ireland, Intifada, Chechnya, Ingushetia, Sarajevo, and also the fall of communism in Russia and the Soviet Union and all over Eastern Europe. And then I also left to become a lawyer because I actually saw how the role of accountability is important. And then the Obama administration asked me to go back to Afghanistan, where I'd been in the 80s, embedded with Soviet troops. And I ended up, instead of staying a year, I spent 5 almost in the administration, living and working in Afghanistan, but also Pakistan and South and Central Asia. And then I left for a nonprofit at Yale. I was vice president at Yale, and then as senior vice president at the Rockefeller Foundation.
David?
You've already heard a lot about me, but I'll just add a couple things of interest maybe. So at Johns Hopkins, I'm also the co-director of the new Gender and Work Initiative, our new center there. And I'm also a member of DACOWITS, here with some of my other associates there, like Dr. Montgomery, and always good to be back with Dr. Johnson Freese. We worked together at the Naval War College for 4 years.
And Kim.
Hi everyone, Kim Brutsche. I can't see you, the lights are lighting. So I'm, well, as of the 1st, Lieutenant Colonel in the Space Force. Thank you. I'm going to say I deserve that, yeah. And I spent 13 years, though, in the Army. I was a field artilleryman, or woman, before actually the lift of the combat ban exclusion policy for women, which was lifted in 2013 under Secretary Panetta. And then I spent some time in special operations. I've got a great sister in arms over here in the corner who can vouch for that. And then I switched over to air defense artillery. That's where I did my 2 battery commands. I commanded Patriot missile battery for deployed in the United Arab Emirates. And then my second command was with short range air defense, so the shoulder fire man-pad missiles as well as the Avenger Stingers on the Humvee, and I did that out of Fort Sill. And then I spent some time as a professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point, teaching the superintendent's capstone course on officership, which is like an amalgamation of like organizational psychology, leadership, ethics, things like that. Then my last assignment in the Army was as an Art of War scholar at the Army Command and General Staff College. I switched over to the Space Force. I became a concepts flight commander, so thinking about all of the future problems. When I say future, I'm talking like 20 to 30, to 50 years in the future as it pertains to space capabilities and how do we address those now. And now I'm doing my DO time, my Director of Operations time, Battalion XO for my Army folks out there, out at Space Delta 10, which is stationed at Patrick Space Force Base near Cape Canaveral, Florida. Very, very happy to be here.
Much of what we're going to talk about on the panel stems from the principles of the Women, Peace, and Security Act. And it's always good for our panelists, and I'm curious to know, how many people in the room feel they have a working knowledge of the Women, Peace, and Security framework? This is very typical. No matter what size the audience is, it's never more than 10%. So you're right there. You're good. Just again to kind of set up the panel for them. Women, Peace, and Security is a framework that stems from United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed in the year 2000. So we are 24 years into it, and it is still largely unknown. So this goes back to the education piece. Like everything else that comes out of a government or government organization, it has to have pillars or something similar to that point. And the Women, Peace, and Security pillars are participation, having women involved, which is a lot of what we're focused on here, protection in many areas of the world, those that Eileen spent a lot of time in. Just coming out of the house was a problem, was a danger. Prevention, that means utilizing our knowledge of what women know, as David talked about, that women know things to prevent bad things from happening. And then relief and recovery, the idea of when you go in and there's chaos or there's a natural disaster and you're rebuilding, that you can rebuild better. You don't have to just build the same old structures that don't work. Women, Peace, and Security is implemented through national action plans. The United States has had a national action plan since the Obama administration. But more than that, we are the only country in the world that passed the Women, Peace, and Security Act, 2017. Key point here, signed by President Donald Trump, co-sponsored by then Representative Kristi Noem and Senator Marco Rubio. And Mike Waltz was co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Women, Peace, and Security Caucus. So we have individuals in key parts of the government who are, or should be, acutely aware of what it is and what it isn't. It isn't DEI. DEI is about numbers through human resources. Women, Peace, and Security is about operations, planning and operations and execution. It is all based on evidence. There are individuals, Valerie Hudson at Texas A&M, Mary Caprioli, who have been, the data is there. It's all backed up. And I want to just give you one little piece of data. If a nation scores high on gender inequality, it is more than twice as likely to be a fragile state, more than 3 times the chance of having a more autocratic, less effective, and more corrupt government, and more than 1.5 times of being violent and unstable. And that violence within the first political order, the home, as we talked about earlier, correlates to violence becoming the de facto method of problem solving nationally. Those numbers make it difficult to refute that gender matters to national security. And interestingly enough, once that relationship is seen, it can't be unseen. You see it everywhere. It just pops up. So with that as background, I'm going to start. I have questions for the panelists, and then we're going to open it to you. And Kim, I'm going to start with you. As an officer within Space Force, the newest military service, Space Force is, in my opinion, somewhat of a model of how to build or rebuild better, rather than just replicating old structures. For example, women represent 47% of Space Force personnel. Why was a more balanced force structure considered desirable and deliberately sought, and what do you consider as the demonstrable effects of that makeup?
Yeah, so I'm not privy to the exact details of Space Force recruiting initiatives or how the Space Force assesses potential candidates. However, I can conject that the Space Force actually did not deliberately seek women, in so much that the unique nature of our service and our mission sets and our talent management priorities are appealing and can be desirable for a lot of women. The Space Force can also hang their hat on the fact that we are the first military service to stand up fully integrated. Women are fully integrated into all roles, meaning there are no gender-based restrictions. And so from its inception, the Space Force has displayed this environment in which everybody can thrive. And I think ultimately that's the goal of all of this, right? To create an environment where people feel like they belong, right? It's conducive to their personal and professional aspirations. And by doing that, this idea of integration, it becomes a little bit more organic. There's a true sense of belonging. So in 2021, the Government Accountability Office had published a report, and this report stated that the sense of belonging is a major factor that drives women's participation and interest in STEM, which is the preponderance of what we do in the Space Force. And I see it. My entire chain of command up through my Delta, which is the equivalent to a brigade in the Army, it's all women. I've never seen anything like that. And guess what? It's not a big deal. We're not, women aren't put on a lily pad in worship because they sent a report up one day, right? It's as we were talking outside, it's part of the fabric of the service, right? There's no forcible entry. It's just there. In 2017, there was a Harvard Business Review article, and it discusses idea of cognitive variability, meaning the differences in perspectives or information processing styles, of which a number of demographic factors could impact that, and gender being one of them. And research showed that, and this is probably not a surprise, right? Teams with higher levels of cognitive variability, right, can solve problems up to 35% faster than teams with homogeneous thinking. And the result of that, the impact of that, is innovation. And innovation is what the Space Force does. The Space Force is a great arena for innovation due to our forward thinking and rapidly evolving operations within the scope of our strategic landscape in this whole new warfighting domain. We require this out-of-box thinking, so we prize pluralistic opinions and these divergent views. Psychological research also highlights that women are drawn to fields that provide intellectual stimulation and opportunities for problem solving. A 2020 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, it found that 43% of women in STEM careers cited intellectual challenge and problem solving as their primary motivation for entering that field. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that 85% of women entering science and engineering fields cited job stability and career advancement as additional motivators. This shows that intellectual engagement often pairs well with pragmatic career goals. And the Space Force fits that bill for many. It's rapidly growing due to, as we know, increased defense and commercial interests in space. So there's this buzzing excitement with standing up a whole new branch, and women want to and have been rising to the occasion of taking on that challenge. In addition, in the Space Force, there's a sharper focus on cognitive fitness. The Space Force is redefining the prototype of a warrior in a way that can complement the personal and professional goals of women. We as in the service, we do not have the same physical barriers that can sometimes dissuade women from wanting to enter certain professions, or could potentially cause some of that unfair criticism of one's already serving. I know, being a field artilleryman, I used to hear that kind of criticism all the time. In the Space Force, we maintain this critical scope of impact on our daily operations. So daily, our missions are high impact, high stakes, using billions of dollars in equipment, and effects that touch both civilian and military populations. And because these mission sets are dependent on hyper-specialization and technical expertise, as well as some terrestrial considerations on where we have to place space assets due to spacisms, this allows a chance for a little bit more geographical stability, which is something that's aspirational for a lot of people in service. Anecdotally, it's for a lot of those reasons that I made that transition over to the Space Force from the Army. And recently, over the last 2 months, I've interviewed dozens of high school and college students who are interested in obtaining ROTC scholarships and commissioning into the Space Force. And what was interesting is that the female candidates in particular, they were really interested in this chance to innovate and be part of what they saw as the future of war fighting. Like, they can be part of something important and brand new and kind of place their marker on history. That was what was really appealing to them. Now, General Ann Dunwoody, who a lot of us know is the first female 4-star general, she had said something in a speech in 2013 that I think relates to this, and it really sticks out to me to this day. She said that, quote unquote, "I realized I was staying in the Army because I was given opportunities to work hard, to tackle interesting and difficult challenges, and make a difference in every assignment in every organization I was assigned to." And every service does that. All right, it's not just the Space Force. Every service does exactly what General Dunwoody describes, and these factors are not conducive to just women. Men would like this as well, but for some of the reasons I shared, right, I theorize that the unique nature of the Space Force highlights those career aspirations. Our mission and our culture and our mission requirements are especially appealing to women. So to recap, women, according to research, right, they're looking for opportunities for problem solving, right? They want to have meaningful impacts in an intellectually challenging environment. And what's special about the Space Force, and why I argue it's a little bit more organic, we want to work in a challenging environment, but in the Space Force, integration is not one of those challenges. It's not what makes it challenging. So let's just get to work, like real work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eileen, you were CNN Moscow bureau chief, foreign correspondent with State Department in Afghanistan. So you've been able to see women in security-related situations from a lot of different perspectives. Can you speak a little bit about what you saw, what difference it makes having women involved?
I think women just bring a different perspective to it, and also bring different negotiating skills, bring different levels of emotional intelligence. We notice things that sometimes others don't notice. I'll give you an example. As a war zone correspondent, I was almost thinking, how is the audience going to relate to this story I'm telling about, shelling of the presidential palace in Grozny in Chechnya? Well, the thing was that right around the presidential palace were these apartment buildings where women and children and elder people were just stuck. They had very little food, everything. They couldn't get out because the shelling was so bad. And yet they were completely caught in this grip of war. And to me, it related because these were women and children that many people have, women and children, we all have families. And so looking at what they were going through, I was covering them, which meant that I was staying in their houses for hours at a time, going between houses, which was pretty dangerous. But my male colleagues would run into the presidential palace, as one of my female colleagues said, touch the wall and go, nanny, nanny, boo-boo. I touched the wall of the palace, and would do a stand-up, shaky stand-up, camera shaking, and, with like shelling and stuff. And I remember one of my editors at CNN said, oh, I think you and Christiane are soft on war. And I covered the war in Sarajevo with Christiane. She was on the Bosnian side, I was on the Serb side. And we both laughed because, we both memorized Janes. We knew every piece of military equipment out there. We could talk about it. But the thing is, what we were trying to do was we noticed things that we felt would really relate to the audience and educate them in a better way. And I just think that was a different way of thinking about things. I also witnessed in Afghanistan, and Kim is one of those people. I think I witnessed a unit that came after her. I was there almost at the same time. I was there more spring of 11 into late summer 12, and then back and forth till the end of 15. And there was a cultural support team, and these cultural support teams, there was a CO actually who led this forward operating base outside of Kandahar, and they had one village when they first came in and they first cleared. And he said until they got the CSTs, that's all they could hold on to. And then they were able to get 2 more villages. Because it wasn't just that these women were going in, these officers were going into the houses and talking to the women and trying to convince the women to convince the men. But it was also that they were doing programming. I mean, when I went there, they asked me to go with them to meet the governor. And what we were trying to do is get literacy programs. We sort of covered it as for children, but it was really for the entire population through the REABs, the radio in a box, which you're all familiar with. And we were able to convince this governor to do that, but they also convinced the village to hold a market for an all-women market, covered, et cetera, for the women to exchange and sell the needlepoint and sort of things they were doing. That gave women economic, they had economic power. And we witnessed this all over the place in Afghanistan. The more we gave women economic power in the household, the village, the community, the more stable the community came. And there's all sorts of data that shows, the amount of money that when a woman makes $1, it's like 80 to 90% of that dollar goes back into the community. It's different for men. So I do think there's a lot of intellectual ways that women think about things and see things that make a difference. And I think that, I understand, people don't want to hear about that. But I think diversity is a bad word, but all diversity is talking about is the fact that you're trying to pull in different opinions that make everybody better. It is more about removing the obstacles to meritocracy than it is about any kind of reverse discrimination. It's removing the actual, obstacles, not just to women, but minorities and others. And I do think that, what David was talking about, the role of inclusive leaders is we know that my daughter has done a lot of this research. She did surgical teams in the UK. And the surgical teams that were more diverse and had more trust, sense of belonging in the team from their leadership, the better outcomes the surgical team had. Less people died. And so that kind of analysis is what I'm talking about. I think we need to get about how women in the military have made the military better.
Yeah, you don't need a hospital with only thoracic surgeons. You need different tools. And the same is true in the military. You don't need just one kind of warrior. You need many kinds of warriors. David, you are recognized as an ally and an advocate of women, peace, and security. So what is your personal story about how you got there, and how does it apply to other men? How do we get more men to be believers?
There's not enough women here.
Well, as the diversity hire up here on the panel,
Right.
I will try not to embarrass anybody. No, it's a great question, and first I would just say that for everybody out there, that one of the things that I believe in is that we don't it's fine for you to say that, right? Call me an ally, but I would never self-label that way. And remembering, because I think that it's a really powerful word, and it connotes power and maybe even privilege for a lot of us. So that I think we have to be careful in terms of just do the work. And if somebody wants to call you an ally, you can feel all warm and fuzzy for a few minutes, but get back to doing the work. For me, it really started with the personal connection. And then I think with a lot of people, it tends to kind of overlap with some of those motivations I talked about earlier. For me, in many ways, my, growing up in a military family as a kid, moving around a lot, and I graduated high school not too far from here. My dad was stationed in D.C. at the time, and the classes that I went to in high school there were some of these AP classes and some advanced classes, but men were a minority, boys were a minority in those classes. I mean, there were by far more women and girls in those classes, and they were, to this day, I still count them as being way smarter than I could ever be, and so that was kind of my bar, my threshold, my experience of how I saw, and I grew up with a mother who worked my entire life, and so seeing powerful women and women who provided and women who worked and were recognized for being leaders and managers and being good at it was just part of that was my bar, my experience. And it was really interesting going to the Naval Academy in the early mid-'80s. I walked into a world that was very different, and it was very foreign in that way, that suddenly women were not valued, and it wasn't like it was implicit, it was very explicitly done. And certainly the law didn't help any of that, but there were other ways that happened, and it was really just off-putting in a lot of different ways. And as it turned out, my partner, my wife, was a classmate of mine, and so her experience, I saw a lot of her experiences there at the Naval Academy, but then when we got into our careers and we had these parallel career tracks, it continued, and I continued to hear more about it, and we had these conversations when we happened to both be home at the dinner table about these experiences, and it was just really mind-blowing for me, and really in that first, I think back to my first tour as a pilot. I was in an all-male squadron because we weren't yet at the point where we got past the combat exclusion law yet, and so I didn't see it as much around there. But in my next tour, where we began the integration, the combat exclusion law had happened, we began the integration of women, and starting to look around and seeing, this is not a one-off. This is just my wife's experiences that that she should be told to smile more often. That she goes, you should get a mentor, and and she can't find, there's nobody, it was really hard for men, especially for men, and there just weren't very many senior women around to do those things. And so looking at that and seeing that experience, across lots of my colleagues' experiences was really part of what I think shaped my ideas about what was fair and just. And I always thought about, hey, if I ever get to be the chief of naval personnel, I'm going to fix this. So when I get there, I didn't make it there, but so I did it a different way. And it really was. It was later on, I had the opportunity through, getting my PhD in sociology with my classmate here. I'm going to embarrass Dr. Montgomery, but getting to work with people like her and many others there who really shaped a lot of my experiences and where my research went, and then thinking about, I think the one thing about coming from the military was always that it had to be practical. It's great, and it's great in higher education to go out there and talk lofty things in the ivory tower and think about theory and concepts, but it's like it had to be practical and bringing it back. And so that was always kind of what shaped my work, and recognizing that, hey, we can make it, we can change these practices, we can change the structure of the organization, we can change the way we think about these things to do that. And I always thought about when Space Force came along and did this you built it straight up that way, I was like, the joy that must have been felt in doing that, and not have to go beat your head on the granite every day, trying to move something in a specific direction. But the thing that was and I'll finish here with this, but I think when I was teaching at the Naval Academy and I began my collaboration with one of my co-authors, Brad Johnson, who's co-authored these books, we started looking around, and it was like, every time the organization wants to address a systemic inequity in this way, and so trying to advance women, to level the playing field for women, it's like we're going to throw resources at a mentoring program for women or a leadership development program for women, which is great, right, in many ways, but one, it sends a lot of different messaging out there, and we wrote a Harvard Business Review article about this, about women's leader development programs, that sometimes men look at these and they see that women need to be fixed, so it's like, oh, here, go off to these programs and they'll fix you. And it's like, no, that's not what that's about. But it sends an unintended message to men that we don't belong, or we don't have a role or a function there. That's not for me. Much like women, peace, and security, right? The branding issue around that is challenging, and words matter, and the connotations of that matter. And so we set out to look at, all right, so why don't more men do this? And what is it that those who do, why are they different, and why are they doing it differently, and how is that valued, and how could we proliferate that? How can we clone that in lots of different ways? And so that's what we were seeking to do, and that's what we still continue to do. We're running into new challenges, I think, today, but I think there's new opportunities as well as we get a chance to do what I call the DEI do-over right now, and in terms of thinking about what didn't we get right. And we did. I think we've made some mistakes along the way, and I count us in that. That there's an opportunity now to kind of think about this differently, and let's address those and come out of this and be better at doing this and more effective in terms of how we're doing it. And I think that's where we're going now. And I think part of that conversation is, and talked about it, it's like we haven't talked about masculinities. Where is that? And there's a conversation out there that young men, and we saw lots of evidence that came out of the election, that younger age group of men voted hard over on the Republican side, and their female counterparts went the other direction. There's a huge divide in that age group, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of it is that these young men, and people like Richard Reeves have written some really interesting books about this, of boys and men, about how, one, we have, in some ways, we've left them behind, and we haven't shown them where they need to go. And there are a lot of great places we need them, and we need them in healthcare. We need them in education, with it. Again, places that have long been female-dominated. Men need to be there too, and need to be role models and setting the example and helping raise the pay levels at the same time for everybody as we do that.
Can I
Sure.
add a? So a big part of my career is communications. As a lawyer, I did crisis management, which a lot of it is about changing the narrative with the facts. I think what David is just saying about words matter is, instead of talking about gender or race or other things, what if we talk about diverse competencies or diverse frames of reference? If you're from a rural community or an urban community, or economically wealthy or economically disadvantaged, those are all frames of reference that are important on a team, because they're going to come with a different set. So it isn't just, I know I agree with the panel earlier, people don't want to hear it, and they don't want to hear women are different or women are better. But that's not about better.
Different, just different.
Yeah, and we're all airmen, Navy, everybody is, a lawyer. I don't want to be a woman lawyer. I don't want to be women pieces. I think David's right about this branding issue, but I'm thinking that if you look at it from just competencies and backgrounds, that maybe that's a better way for us to frame it as a communication.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
It cycled back to the Space Force. Hi. So one of my first major meetings I had in the Space Force, somebody had said to me at a table, oh my goodness, I am so excited to have some diversity at the table. And automatically I felt super defensive, because I'm like, why? Why are you saying that? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Asian American? But no, they were like, they followed up with, we really need your joint perspective on, from the Army, and you're not a STEM major. I'm a political scientist, not the scientist that they usually prize. They're like, you have an international relations focus. We need that perspective, because we have all the astrophysics brainiacs. We need you to kind of round out the team. So to your point,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely, kind of cognitive diversity and once again, once it's woven into the fabric of an organization, then people feel that sense of belonging, to your point about why maybe young men are not feeling, a true
Right.
sense of belonging in society.
One of the interviews that I did in relation or in conjunction with the book was with a woman admiral who kept referring me back to her sports coach from college. Turns out she played on the same soccer team as Mia Hamm, so we're not talking,
Not shabby.
And the coach of that soccer team initially was coaching the men, and 2 years later he was asked to coach the women as well, and this was in the late 70s. And he has a video that I referenced that basically talks about, he was told, treat them both the same. Gender equality means treat everyone the same. And he said it was an unmitigated disaster. Men and women hear differently, they're motivated differently, they respond differently. He said with his men, he'd go in and say, go kill them! And they were like, yeah, and we'd go out there and win. And he said he'd go in and do that with the women, and they'd look at him like, we must flee the room. He is nuts, And he had to learn that how to deal differently. And I think, it's this idea of once you can accept that it's not men are better, women are better, it's we are different, and you can maximize effectiveness if you realize it and act accordingly. Okay, back to my question.
Right, sorry. We diverted.
So
tried to
last year, when we were here, we were talking about how to move from integration to inclusion. Well, of course, that's got to go away now. And just the idea of integration has been challenged. So, Kim, since you're in the branch that is most integrated, what do we do to convince leaders on the value of integration?
Yeah, well, first of all, go Army. I didn't know you came from the Naval Academy. So we'll do better next year. We deserve that loss.
I
Anyways,
have 3 people in my family. I have 3 people in my family who went to Navy, so sorry.
am I just a woman on an island? Okay, that's fine. I need a boat to get me off of it, I guess. So, all right. But no, I think that's a really good question. I think that's a really important, a poignant question right now. But I think the bigger question though is how do we replicate some of the positive aspects of the Space Force culture, since we've shown that we've demonstrated a positive model for integration. So how do we demonstrate the positive aspects of our culture while also making it appealing for all kinds of people, right? When we say integration, we're not just saying women specifically. We're saying all kinds of people to, again, feel like they truly belong on the team, while also educating leaders, educating being the key verb here, educating leaders on how to overcome some of those psychological barriers that prevent meaningful connections that can maximize human potential. The Space Force model, like I've already stated, is organic, with that organic nature. I would argue being a little antithetical to this idea of needing to convince anyone. If you have to convince somebody, then they're not going to be convinced, right? To your previous talk, right? Like, we have men in the room, and I would argue, that most of you already probably get it, right? So how do we, if I force somebody to sit in this seat, and I'm like, your place of duty is right here, and you're going to learn about, how women are great, and they're going to sit there and, think about chocolate chip cookies or something, right, or the coffee outside until it's over, right? So we need to have this call to action through holistic leadership education rooted in organizational psychology, and maybe not so much, just direct rhetoric, like women matter, or insert demographic, factor, that matters. I'm like, okay, great. So when I was at the Command General Staff College, in my Art of War program, I wrote my thesis on the retention of females in combat arms branches. And I asked the primary research question of, does the Army require a unique retention strategy to retain women in combat arms occupations? And I found the answer to be no. Instead, I recommended to the Army that the Army looks at how it develops its leaders to consider and value their formation's unique populations. I think we've already kind of talking about this. Because in doing so, then we can foster this positive culture where every member feels respected, they're empowered to advance professionally, and they feel accountable for behaviors that align with the Army's values, which I assess to be all indicators of job satisfaction. Now, my results disappointed a lot of people. They were not revolutionary, and we weren't starting, a gender war, because this wasn't anything specific to women. Like, this can apply to insert any demographic, and those findings may be largely the same. So I recommended to the Army that they take their cross-cultural competency training, the one that a lot of us did prior to deployment, and we move it beyond this idea of, the range of operations abroad, and we apply it to leadership within our own ranks. And I'm not talking about, language skills or customs or whatever was on the little smart cards they would give us. I'm talking about those tangential, like peripheral skills that enable leaders to navigate communication gaps, leverage different perspectives to empower strategic thinking. So some of the skills that I recommended that the Army did do a better job of deliberately training in PME or professional military education, things like active listening, emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, intellectual humility, perspective taking, nonverbal communication awareness, conflict resolution, pattern recognition. Right, all things that will stimulate critical thinking and then make us more culturally aware. So all that to say, lean in, because leaders just need to genuinely know their people and know their missions and know their capabilities, be able to find the gaps in their capabilities, and then understand how to use the unique skills of their people to fill those gaps. So in math, I said I wasn't a scientist, but basic arithmetic. So in math, integration, that's the word, right? Integration is defined as the method of adding or summing up the parts to equal the whole, to comprise the whole, right? So you have to break down each number to what it is. So 3 + 2 = 5, right? 5. You can't force 3 to be something that it's not. 3 is 3. You can change 3 to be something else, but it will cause a cascading effect that impacts the other numbers, right? The rest of the equation. Now, any theoretical mathematicians out here, you might challenge me on this, right? But you can apply that basic arithmetic analogy to leadership, right? You can't force, to your soccer analogy or your soccer story, right? Like, you can't force 3 to be anything but a 3 without impacting the equation, in this case, the organization. So what can, to your question, what can we do for leaders, right? We can demand counselings, performance reviews, mentorship sessions, sit-down talks, sensing sessions. Make them get to know you. I've commanded twice, and I'll tell you, I'm super well-intentioned, and I want to get to know my people, but you're getting shotgun blasted with all the priorities, right? I really appreciated my soldiers who would come up to me and go ma'am, can we sit down and talk? I want you to know X, Y, and Z. Thank you, right? Volunteer your unique skills where you think you could bring value to a mission. Be creative about it. For example, my unit, my Space Delta, we're transitioning to a new mission, space wargaming. Sounds super cool, right? Months prior, I had casually spoken to one of my E5 Guardians, and he told me he loves tabletop strategy board games, like Settlers of Catan and Dungeons & Dragons. So I found an opportunity here, right? So I've now asked him to build a tabletop war game that we could have space organizations play in the evaluation of space concepts, or to build the fundamentals of space wargaming, right? And that's just something he does personally, right? Or it doesn't even have to be earth-shattering. I crochet. Hashtag, granny hobbies, right? And, I crocheted a going away gift for a work colleague last week because people found out I crochet. When people feel like they can contribute in a way that feels authentic to who they are as a person, then they're better service members. Has anyone seen the movie Rocky? Yeah, okay. So I'm from the great city of Philadelphia. You may be hearing it in some of my accent. Yeah. Go Birds. Thank you. At least I had some allies in that. Okay, so in the first Rocky movie, Paulie is talking to Rocky. He's dating Adrian. He's like, hey, why are you dating my sister? She's dumb, she's stupid, she's ugly, all the awful things Paulie said. And it always stuck with me what Rocky said. He said, she fills gaps. I got gaps and she got gaps and we fill each other's gaps. And that's integration. That's integration, right? We have to fill each other's gaps. Again, don't force the 3 to be anything but a 3. Make it, it is what it is, and it fits within the equation. You don't hammer a puzzle piece into place unless you're me. Right? So we need to, and this is my last point here, so we need to encourage and empower leaders to take, that tactical pause from their many priorities to draw that circle around themselves and assess, how well do they actually know their people? And force them to assess how well they actually know their people. And more than just specialty codes, occupational specialties and all that, more than certifications. That's the service name tape side, right? The one that says U.S. Navy or U.S. Space Force, Army, things like that. I'm talking about the other one, the name tape, right? And in understanding those 2 halves of a whole person, then you may see some of the positive impacts of an organization where people feel like they belong. And then again, back to the organic nature, then you don't have to convince anyone. It is part of the fabric of your culture. I think that's it.
All right.
Hey, go Birds again, yeah.
About 8 minutes till lunch.
Okay, till lunch.
Shoot.
I'll keep
All
going.
right.
Don't want to stand between somebody and lunch.
So David, we're going to take advantage of you being the diversity person on when women advocate for women, peace, and security or integration, it comes across as self-serving. And I've often said, you are the much better salesperson than I am. Take this opportunity and be honest. Tell the women, me, all of us in the room, what are we doing wrong? How can we better sell the point to men?
Yeah, what are we doing wrong?
Wow.
It's just us in the
We're
room.
not putting you on the spot, though.
So it goes back to the conversation I think we were having about trying to convince somebody of something, right? That they don't want to be convinced of, or that it goes counter to everything that they think they've ever known about it. And so I think people know when they feel like they're being sold something or trying to convince, that they kind of sink into their position, and I think that's the challenge that we all have. And it goes back to, from my perspective, it goes back to some very basic change management principles of thinking about who are the resistors in the group, right? So when I'm trying to create change, I want to find my allies, I want to find out them, and we want to create that momentum and certainly that cohort of people that really understand. But then I need to identify the resistors and think about how do I bring them along. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're all kind of struggling for the right answer with that. And I think this is one of the places where in the DEI do-over that I was talking about that we can get it right, is go back and think about how do we just bring this back into the everyday of what we do, and keeping it very practical, lowest common denominator, as we know where the challenges are in various everyday practices that we have within our organizations. How can we just go back to that and think about how do we do it differently, right, with men and women? And so we're not talking about it, we don't need to talk about it from a gender perspective. It's about doing the job. Just bring it back to doing the job, and because everybody resonates, especially in the military. Everybody resonates with the mission. And so bringing it back to the mission, I think, is critical in doing this, and keeping any foreign language to the everyday Guardian, Airman, Sailor, Marine out there, so that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like this is some weird concept that's being forced on them, and bring it back to the practical every day. And this is where I think in the work that I do with men's allyship, often there are companies that want us to come in and do workshops with just men. And I'm like, well, why? Why do you want to do it with just men? And they were like, well, because we think they'll be more comfortable that way. We think that they will actually open up and have a conversation with you if it's just them in the room. If we put women in the room, I don't know if they're gonna, I don't know how that's gonna work. And I'm like, but when we're done, they have to go back to work, and they're going to work with women, right? Yeah. So at some point, we need to get there faster, and so we try to convince organizations that doing this, whether it's a workshop or you're doing it just kind of in a practical way every day in a team, that you need to do it together from the beginning of what it's supposed to look like, what it should look like, and keeping it in the same vein of it's not something different, or it's not somehow in some little bubble of a safe space to do that. But when we do that, making sure that when men are brought in and they will, and we do, make mistakes, we all do, that we approach that with some compassion, that, hey, hopefully intent is there to do right. Maybe we didn't get it exactly right, but provide the feedback. They need the feedback, they need to hear it, and to show that it's okay, and that, hey, I can learn from it, and we can talk about this, and then we can move on, right? This is the way that we do things. And again, I think normalizing it and making it part of our everyday is the key.
I'm going to give you the last minute or two to kind of final thoughts.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh. No, I want to just say that I think the point, to me, the main point here is that this has to get, you can educate through the everyday. And one of the things is when we talk about allyship, it's also, it's a reciprocal process. So one of the things you can do is to show someone who might be a resistor, help them with something with your own unique skill. And then that way they're like, wait a minute, that was helpful. And then also use other trusted messengers, which is a common thing that we do, to basically talk about how your special talents or their special talents. And then on the everyday, these trainings don't work. But the everyday, the work of how do you hold a meeting? How do you get someone else's voice included? And I think that's another way that people can, so when you see something, say something. So if you see in a meeting that somebody is not, their voice has not been heard, to be able to say, oh, I know so-and-so, they have a view on this, I'd love to hear it. Or, and I know in the military you can't always do that. I've been in enough military meetings, and I'm always the skunk at the garden party. But I think, but I do think there's opportunities a lot of times in informal meetings where you could do that, and I think it's important because I think that I also think as a leader, for me as a leader, I didn't see people on my team as if they weren't getting something or something as failing. I saw it as if them failing, as a failure on me to not get to know their special qualities and to actually give them assignments that really brought out those qualities and gave them and made them shine. And I think as a leader that you end up with a much better team when you make sure that 3 is the best 3 they can be and not try to make 3 a 5. But make 5 the best they can be. And I've been, I have my teams still, from my very earliest days as a bureau chief, still come back to me for mentorship and everything. To me, that's the biggest compliment. So for their own leadership, as they rise into leadership, they're like, how did you do that? Because we were always a cohesive team that felt like we belonged, and we were always super, super productive, and we won a bunch of awards or whatever. So. Anyway.
So I'm sorry we didn't get to have audience questions, but we're all here. So
Yeah.
please approach us at lunch whenever, and we are happy because all of this is about discussion. I think that's our common point. We need to talk about these issues. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.